about just the AI revolution, out to both the question of what AI is and is not, and also what kinds of things we need to be looking for. So I'm going to share my screen for a moment. Bo, I hope yeah. So one of the things I'm hoping to kind of consider and thinking about ChatGPT is just whether it's a new fad or a new era, and that may be a false dichotomy. So I'm just throwing that question out at the beginning. As I said, I'm going to focus on ChatGPT, and Rebecca will broaden it out. So I'll focus in three sections. First, just the question of what ChatGPT is and is not, what it can do, how it works, what it can't do yet, and what might be coming. And then some examples of applications just to stimulate our creativity and start thinking about how we might be using this personally. And then end with some thoughts. I mentioned briefly at the beginning, I am a professor of philosophy and women's and gender studies. This means that I am, of course, thinking about ethics of technology. That's actually one of the bread and butter classes that I teach to undergrads, to computer science majors and philosophy majors. But I'm also just really fascinated by the AI humanity distinction, and I'll offer some thoughts on that at the end of the presentation. First, a disclaimer, this presentation is being given on February 10th. Much of what's here is probably going to be obsolete in a month or less than a month. So please consider that we all need to stay current and thinking about what's coming. So what is ChatGPT? For those of you who have not already discovered it, you can go to chat.openai.com. OpenAI is the company that has created it. You may find that it is at capacity now. I've been able to get onto it about 10% of the times that I've tried in the last month or so. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. You can see why they use the acronym. That's a mouthful. And what it is it's a language model, or a cluster of language models that use a probability distribution based on a huge corpus of text to generate human-like text. Okay, it does not have access to facts. That's really, really important to keep in mind. All it does is to generate a human-like response in response to just about any prompt you put in. And I found that the more detailed the prompt, the better. I'll say more about that in a bit. So it has been pre-trained on curated internet data, which was culled in 2021, which means it has no access to anything that went on the internet after 2021. And, obviously that means any news in 2022 or any specific websites. It can't, for example, summarize a website. It also has access to kind of web content through web crawler and Wikipedia, and then most importantly, most significantly, two massive bodies of texts and journals. Now, when I say massive, this is part of what makes ChatGPT so new, is there are reportedly some 30 million books that it has access to, or the way that AI folks put it, it has been fed 30 million books. And just in comparison, the holdings of the Library of Congress are about 37 million books. So that pre-training, meaning it's fed all of this data, is then fine-tuned with what AI calls supervised and reinforcement learning. Those of us who have been using ChatGPT for the past couple of months are helping in training it. In other words, whether we submit and resubmit a prompt gives us some data, as does the kinds of prompts that we submitted. There were 1 million users within 5 days of it being launched and 100 million users in less than a month. There is no other form of technology of any kind that has grown that quickly. So you say, what's the big deal? It's a chat bot, right? We've had chatbots and we know how poisonous they can be. Microsoft's Tay was the most famous example. It went off the rails. When I say went off the rails, it spectacularly went off the rails within 24 hours of being released online. It was generating tweets that were, misogynist, racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, just a horrible, horrible bunch of, echoing what it was hearing from humanity. ChatGPT is different. It doesn't use live internet data. And the prompts are moderated and filtered so that ChatGPT itself is not exposed to racist or sexist, and I really should say potentially racist or sexist or anti-Semitic or homophobic, et cetera, all the forms of ugly prompts. But also it's been fed on a much larger corpus of data. It's not just what's online. It's also, as a result of the Google Books projects and other projects to digitize human knowledge, it now has that access, that knowledge available to it. And it's trained to correct false information. So one of the more famous examples of this is that if you say, tell me about when Christopher Columbus came to the US in 2015, it will first correct you, but then it will go beyond that and offer kind of a hypothetical scenario of what would happen if Christopher Columbus visited what is now called the US in 2015, including, for example, many of the anti-Columbus sentiments. So in that sense, again, it's beyond any chatbot we've ever seen. But, and here's the big caveat, or one of the big caveats, but note that it's been trained on the published corpus of human knowledge, peer-reviewed articles and published books. That has not been produced by a representative sampling of humanity. So it is necessarily biased, just as any of those of us who have been trained on the same corpus are necessarily biased. The data collected is really, really important to understand. I have students actually working on a white paper on this right now. So the privacy policy, there's a link here, and I'm sure Bo will distribute or somehow make available the slideshows after the slide deck. The privacy policy explicitly states that data can be shared with third-party vendors, law enforcement, affiliates, and other users that are pretty much unrestricted. It also retains the right to use and sell the data. And although accounts can be deleted, the prompts that you submit are retained. And that includes when you say, please clear the prompts. Those prompts are still retained and associated with your account. So this means that, for example, it violates the internet terms of uses for students under 13 should not be using it. But the terms of use, the OpenAI terms of use require that users be at least 18. So this is something to consider. I think there are other reasons not to have an assignment in which your students are required to go on it, but it's something to consider. If you are going to use it in the classroom, you probably want to be generating those reports or the responses yourself or under your account. There's a Southern student white paper that provides just a brilliant explanation of why privacy matters from last year. Again, I'm hoping that you'll take a quick look at this after the presentation, because this is focusing on not just why privacy matters and issues with surveillance in the pandemic and the aggregation of data, but specifically it's focusing on the issues of privacy. This was in response to an invite from the system office the issues of privacy that are related to Blackboard. And because that's something we all use, I'm hopeful that this conversation is going to open up a broader conversation about the other tools that we use, not just ChatGPT. Hang on. So ChatGPT and AI is, of course, aware of these concerns. Not surprisingly, if you put in ChatGPT the prompt, what are some privacy concerns for using ChatGPT, it will come up with everything from data retention and data sharing to personalization and profiling to bias and inaccuracies and lack of transparency. So there are other pitfalls and problems. One of them is that ChatGPT currently makes up stuff to fill in the gaps in knowledge. And that includes, for example, if you ask it to generate a biography or, kind of a bibliography, it will generate fake academic references, and they're really convincing fake academic references. So when you have students who are turning in papers, it's worth checking those. It's worth just taking a quick look and jumping out to make sure that they're real references. The other problem is that the eloquence of the responses can mask both underlying toxicities and biases, but also falsehoods. If you ask it to generate my seventh grader asked it to generate a book report, and it was a great learning lesson because all of the facts were inaccurate, given that ChatGPT didn't have access to that particular book. It is not, again, this is worth emphasizing to your students, it is not designed to write sentences that are true. It's just designed to write sentences that sound good, that are plausible. And of course, the reliability and the quality of the responses vary widely according to the details of the prompt. This is no different than, say, using Google to access information. We've all learned over time to develop the appropriate response, the appropriate prompts for Google to, kind of do the right searches. Our students need some training in understanding not just what it is that they're getting, but also how to submit the right kind of prompt. And then there's also, there's a bunch of things they're fixing, but one of the most notorious things that was discovered with people playing in December was that you can tell it to pretend to be mean, and it will generate some really hateful, kind of nasty sorts of responses. And worse than that, it's hard to turn it off. So that's a little loop that they're currently fixing. All right, applications of ChatGPT. This is where it gets interesting, exciting. So first, there's basic text editing, right? You can say, edit the following text using AP style guidelines, or create a bibliography in APA format using these sources, or check this text for plagiarism, or check this text for biases, or reduce the following text to 500 words, or suggest a title, or translate this text into Mandarin, or just about any language. That power is unparalleled. Yes, I know we have all kinds of, Grammarly and editing platforms, etc. But I've never seen anything quite as versatile, quite as quick, and quite as powerful as ChatGPT, which is why Microsoft invested $2 billion in it and is going to be embedding it into the Microsoft suite of products. Something to keep in mind here is ChatGPT is not going away. Right, it's attracted the attention not just of the public, but all of the tech billionaires who are trying to figure out how to either do better or embed it in their own products. It can create text, of course. So write a Twitter thread about anything you want, right? Which is great because it saves a lot of time. Create a PowerPoint presentation. I didn't use PowerPoint. I didn't use ChatGPT for this PowerPoint presentation only because it was at capacity and I couldn't get on. suggest a response to this email. And that includes like write a quick, quick response to a student, giving them an extension till next Tuesday, and then you just cut and paste it. I have, again, to kind of educate my students about this, I have deliberately started using ChatGPT to respond to emails that I don't need to. But then at the bottom, I put a little, I can write it on my own, but I put a little note saying this email written by ChatGPT. And again, it's just to kind of get them used to the idea that you should credit it when you do something with it. The other thing to mention there too is obviously for FERPA reasons, you don't want to put a student's full name in that email, right? You might say, write an email to Tasha giving her an extension till Tuesday and saying that she hopes that her grandfather recovers, right? Something like that. Write a lesson plan for 5th grade class on women in science. It is spectacularly good at that. I've been really, really impressed at some of the lesson plans that it produces. One of the more famous examples, and again, I'll let you explore this link after, is write a biblical verse in the style of King James Bible explaining how to remove a peanut butter sandwich from a VCR. It was that example that just really pivoted me towards it. It was really, really creative. Other things I've tried, write a dialogue between Bell Hooks and Simone de Beauvoir about radical love. So much fun. You can create whatever it is you want to read, or write a haiku about Arctic weather, sonnets, novels, short stories, anything. Retrieving information is also, it does something it does much, much better than any primitive internet search engine. It's not at all surprising that Google laid off most of the Google search team in the wake of ChatGPT's, announcement debut. So, for example, my 12-year-old wants to know about Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Explain quantum physics and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle to a 12-year-old. Suggest a 9-month marathon training plan for someone who is not currently running. Hey, ChatGPT, I need a recipe for a vegan, gluten-free lasagna. Give me a list of 10 short stories that deal with lightning with a summary of each. Okay. Suggest guest lectures on social justice within 100 miles of New Haven. On and on and on. Again, you can just find so many examples online. I've put a link to my favorite compilation of examples. Basic coding and debugging. For those who might be mathematicians, you can write LaTeX, anything. For those of you who might have WordPress sites, you can develop WordPress extensions. There's no excuse to not have a beautiful site at this point. You can debug code in any language. You can write test cases, find edge cases, get strategy ideas. One of the things that I am cautioning the students who are computer science majors in my class is not to use it to learn to write code. And I'd say the same thing with respect to writing itself, right? I don't think it's wise to use it to learn to write, right? Because you're going to learn it. First, the code that it's writing is out of context, right? When you're coding, you want to create code in context. But also the writing that it creates, while it can be really, really, really creative, it doesn't have that je ne sais quoi, that soul, right? It doesn't have that that originality, that creativity. And as a result, I find that students aren't as passionate about it. I'll say more about that in a minute. There's a lot of creative applications that have come out because ChatGPT, like other neural networks, other forms of AI, works by recognizing patterns. There are people, for example, who have taken entire enormous cold crime case files, pumped it in, and asked ChatGPT to solve it. Because ChatGPT is open access, easy to get access to, and is seeing patterns that nobody else has seen. There are people who are using it in conjunction with other AI, like DALL-E or Midjourney, and saying things like, the example there is somebody wanted a fantastic or a phantasmical, I think, decoration for a living room. And then ChatGPT gave the ideas, a list of ideas, and you just pump those into an AI art or AI visual app like Midjourney, I think is best. And it produces really phenomenal examples of, what you can do. Furniture design is another one. There's an 11-year-old who designed a little game that went viral where you put in ChatGPT, you are a text video game where you give me options, A, B, C, D. Those of us who are children of the 80s will be really fond of this, right? As my choices. The scene is Harry Potter. I start out with 100 health, and then you can just go on and on and on playing the game with it. I happen to live in the Upper Valley on the border of New Hampshire and Vermont, and there's a medical doctor who was saying, oh, this is fantastic. They were using it to take the patient notes that they had without the patient name and very quickly generate a text summary to submit to insurance. But you can also use it to plumb the depth of human knowledge for patterns. Now, again, this doesn't have medical data. But again, the strength of AI is that it can recognize patterns. So what medical conditions is a 65-year-old African Japanese male at risk for? Again, the responses are only as good as the questions. We can use this for good or not. So some thoughts. First, let me just take a moment and show you how I'm using this in my classroom. So I, in this ethics of technology class, one of the things that I've done for years now is open the class with a documentary by Werner Herzog called Lo and Behold. And it's Reveries of the Connected World. It's sort of a a documentary that traces both the origin and rise of the internet, but also talks about the pros and cons of technology generally. And so in the past, I've always had this detailed, kind of prompt, like, watch the documentary, use your notes to identify scenes that interest you, and then imagine you're having a conversation with Herzog about one or more of these specific scenes, and write a dialogue like a script of the play. And then I'm asking them to make sure that the character challenges Herzog's view, because I'm starting as a philosopher to teach them kind of the debates, right? And don't just say that you have doubts about the view or issue, make sure that you provide reasons such as data, examples, and analogies, right? And so then I give them an example of a philosophical dialogue and a link to the script. So this is what they did, as you can see, Tuesday, February 7th, a few days ago. Well, I pumped that prompt into ChatGPT 9 times. It continuously revised it. Let me just read you this last response. Setting: a cozy lounge in a film festival where Herzog is promoting the documentary. A small group of people are gathered around a table, including the protagonist, who's a tech journalist. Herzog is seated opposite the protagonist, sipping tea. Herzog, gesturing with his cup: in the film, I spoke with Adler Planetarium astronomer Lucian Walkowitz and cosmologist Lawrence Krauss about a solar storm in 1859 called the Carrington event. Protagonist: yes, I remember that scene. They said that even a smaller solar flare event could disrupt our communications and cause outages in our power grid. Herzog, nodding: precisely. They painted a grim picture of what would happen if the internet were to shut down, saying that modern civilization would collapse and people wouldn't remember how they used to live before. Protagonist, well, raising an eyebrow: well, I understand that concern. Don't you think that's a bit extreme? Herzog, leaning forward: on the contrary, I find it hard to dispute their claims. Our dependence on technology has grown so much that it's become ingrained in our daily lives. Protagonist, I see your point, but I think it's important to consider the resilience of human civilization. We've survived and adapted to various disasters and technological failures throughout history. Herzog, stroking his chin: that's true, but those events took place before the internet became a critical infrastructure for communication, commerce, and information. A widespread shutdown of the internet would be unlike any disaster we've ever experienced. And, protagonist nodding, I understand. But I think it's important to remember that technology is just a tool. It's not the end all and be all of human civilization. We've survived without it for centuries and will continue to do so, even if the internet goes down. So the assignment for this coming Tuesday is going to be first to read through my comments on their responses from this past week, and then to read through these chat GPT responses and my comments on the chat GPT responses, because, for example, I would say if this were a student response, I would highlight a sentence like, we've survived and adapted to various disasters and technological failures throughout history, and say, can you give me an example? More details, evidence, support it, right? And so it's both teaching them that ChatGPT is producing impressive but not perfect responses. But the challenge will be to improve their response, and embedding ChatGPT work is just fine because I know it, they're doing it. They know that I know that they're doing it, right? And essentially what I'm doing is raising the bar. I'm not satisfied with what I was getting a year ago or what I was getting this past week. I want students to learn to use ChatGPT to improve their own writing. And I want them to learn to evaluate their own writing using the rubric that I have for this assignment on ChatGPT itself. Right? I'll have more to report after next Tuesday. So let me just go back to kind of conclude this slideshow with some thoughts. So as I think I said already, I really think that ChatGPT and AI are here to say. I don't know if anybody's read Dan Brown's last book, Origins, or most recent book, Origins, but it really reminds me of the personal assistant in that book. And I won't ruin the ending for anybody who hasn't read it. It's, classic Dan Brown drama, other than to say that the key question is, can we train AI, or for that matter, any algorithm or any neural network to make moral decisions, given that we ourselves don't know what moral decisions are, but also that we need to be wary of simply settling for the idea that we want AI to make us happy, and as long as it is meeting our needs, keeping us happy, that's great. But, I think, I think that we would be unwise to say, I respect faculty who say, I'm going back to paper and pencil. And I have some colleagues who have done that. And just saying, the only way that students are going to respond is paper and pencil in the classroom. But that's a little like, the genie's out of the bottle. Our students are going to have to learn to survive and thrive in this world. And I think that, the possibility of a solar flare disrupting the internet notwithstanding, I think that we're failing to serve their needs by simply denying advances in technology. I also think that AI, it's on the rise, right? AI is coming to life, and I'm using life in scare quotes because I'm not one of those people who thinks that it's conscious, but it's coming to life in ways around the world that are both thrilling and terrifying. This is an image that Kevin Roos from the New York Times created using DALL-E, which is OpenAI's art form, using that prompt, a distributed linguistic superbrain that takes the form of an AI chatbot. It's pretty clear that many of the jobs that we do now are going to be better done by AI, or AI supervised by humans. And it's pretty clear that that's the case for many of the students that we're training right now too. I I think that we need to be challenging them to think about that, but also encouraging them to be thinking creativity, like thinking courageously. Creativity and courage are going to be key for them. I'm not sure I know how to teach things like creativity and courage and resilience, but I do know how to encourage it, and I do know it when I see it. And then I open the ethics of technology class with these two quotes are at the top of the syllabus. The first from Einstein says, "It has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity." And the second from Ray Kurzweil, Google engineer, is, "Technology is part of our humanity. We created it to extend ourselves." So in addition to AI being on the rise, transhumanism is also on the rise. And unfortunately, 8 out of the top 10 most wealthy tech billionaires are all transhumanists. They all believe that the next logical step for humanity is to jettison the shackles of our biological bodies, and whether that means becoming cyborgs or injecting ourselves into the metaverse, that I find terrifying. Not just because the idea itself is terrifying, but because there's so much money behind it. And so while at some level, the message that I deliver to students over the course of the semester is that I believe that these two quotes are a false dichotomy, that, we can both be creating technology to extend ourselves, but also be out of control, right? It can also be clear that technology does indeed exceed our humanity. I have a few additional resources. It was really hard to select these because there's just so many excellent resources online, but a few additional resources that might be helpful. I want to just flag the fact that I have explicitly linked this against cop shit, excuse my language, but it's a quote from this a grad student blog that is calling out not just concerns about policing in the classroom, meaning trying to control and constrain what students do, but also the general ethos of treating education as a manufacturing process, right? Treating education as something that we do, kind of, students in, widgets or products out. And I think that the reason that I think that that's relevant here is because I see two very different responses to ChatGPT amongst my colleagues. One is, this is great. I'm going to use it to grade my papers, which, by the way, it does produce pretty reasonable summary responses to papers. And you can use it to provide all of the grammatical corrections if the student hasn't used ChatGPT much more rapidly than you can with any other app. But then, so that's the kind of whole, full-throated, wholehearted endorsement. And then there's this other end of people who say, this is the end of the world and back to paper and pencil, and students will not be allowed to use ChatGPT. That's the policing kind of mentality. And I'm just including this particular piece so that you have an opportunity to read it. He does a much more eloquent job of voicing the concerns about that approach than I ever could. Okay, I think that's it. Let me stop sharing. We have Rebecca, I don't know if you want to take time to pause and discuss, or do you want to go right into your presentation?
We could do it either way. If anybody has any questions for Heidi specifically, I am going to address some of the points that she raised, so it is possible that I may actually answer some of your questions. So I could go right into that, but if anybody has anything that they want to bring up right now, we could take a few minutes to do that. give people a chance to, okay, we've got a couple of questions.
Yes.
I think Tricia was first.
Not exactly a question. I just want to say that was amazing presentation, but will the slides be made available at some point? It would not be the same thing looking at the slides without Heidi talking, but thank you.
I will, I'll post a link to the presentation in the chat now. But I believe that Bo or Rebecca will be posting or distributing them as well. I'll also try to highlight some of the, the key links that I was discussing that I clicked on. I'll show you those as well. Thanks, Tricia.
Of course.
And then I think, is that Emily?
Yes, thanks so much. Heidi, this was fantastic, just as Tricia said, as an overview. And I wondered about the last thing you said about the sort of two camps of professors and their reaction to ChatGPT. And your first summary was those who are going to use it sort of as a tool of convenience for summarizing grading, let's say. But it seems like when you showed how you had your students interact with that assignment, that there are much more meaningful ways that are still work-driven to like utilize ChatGPT. And I'm wondering, like, how do we lean into that rather than how simple it could make things? And if we're not thinking and really working with it, then it just does become, for student and teacher alike, a sort of support that's not thoughtful, right? It's just an ease. It's just something to take care of a time constraint. It's not necessarily meaningful. So that's interesting to me.
Yeah, that's, I think that each one of us has to answer that individually because we all bring our own personalities to the classroom, right? So, and we all have an interpersonal relationship with our students that is the context for everything that we say, right? As you can tell, I tend to be more of a libertarian, right? Kind of let 1,000 flowers bloom and try to meet students where they're at. And I actually, I profoundly respect my colleagues who feel that they need more control in the classroom. I think that, the assignment that I showed you, I wanted to show a really specific assignment. And I should probably excerpt that and create a link that isn't, I was showing you a live student assignment, and I didn't want to embed that in the presentation for obvious reasons. I think that so there's a lot to say. One of the links to the resources actually is a link that Marie McDaniel belongs to a writing group, and there's a guru in there, a link that she developed in creating different options for how to use ChatGPT as a writing tutor to support students, right? Not just by saying, okay, write what you're going to write and then put it into ChatGPT, but through this kind of iterative, pure editing is something I will never use again, right? I mean, why? Like it tends to be pretty superficial and forced anyhow. And I will have students know, I have to figure out how I'm going to have them feed it in without violating the privacy concerns, right? I don't use Blackboard for these same privacy concerns. I'm like really sensitive to that. I don't want Blackboard, our system-wide contract with Blackboard right now allows them to, for example, sell our students' grades, right? Not just in aggregate, but with the students' names attached. And so I don't put grades in Blackboard, and I do not put any data actually there other than the announcement that I use my own websites. So I'm wandering a little bit. I'm trying to I think the main point I want to make here is just that it's going to be individual, and in the same sense that I believe we should let 1,000 flowers bloom in the classroom, I believe that we should let 1,000 flowers bloom amongst ourselves too, right? I'm hoping that we're not going to devolve into judgment of each other, but I'm also hoping that we'll develop some kind of a forum for all of us to share what we're doing. And, you know, whether that's faculty development or online, I don't know. So, okay, but thanks for the question.
Okay, I will start in with my presentation. So I'm going to be showing a whole bunch of live sites. And the thing that I want to talk most specifically about are first some of the kind of downsides of a lot of this. First of all, here is the start of the ChatGPT privacy policy. They collect pretty much everything that it is possible to collect. Also, if you haven't signed up yet, you are asked to give an email and a text message, a text-enabled phone number, sorry. And they have to be working because they are going to send you links or codes to both of those. So you can't put in dummy info. As I said, they collect pretty much everything that they can possibly collect. And then they use it pretty much however they want. You notice this, how we use personal information to conduct research, which may remain internal or may be shared with third parties, published or made generally available. And that's your personal info. So this is actually the main reason that I am not happy with the idea of having your students use this directly. It is not a good privacy situation. I would strongly recommend that if you decide to use this, you do not require the students to make their own accounts. It's also awkward because it's down a lot, or not, not allowing you to log in. So, it would be pretty awkward if you said, okay, you're all going to create accounts in ChatGPT and do all of this stuff, and then that's one of the weeks that it's down. It's not reliable enough, and there are all these privacy issues. I just don't think we should be requiring our students to make accounts with sites that we as an institution have no contract with. As Heidi says, Blackboard has all of this stuff, but at least we have a contract with them. And by making, that available, they are agreeing to certain things with us already. There is no agreement with OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT. Absolutely none. The university has no control over that. We can't require them to do anything at all, or stop them from doing anything at all. So beyond that, there are other AI stuff going on. Similar to the ability that ChatGPT has to write things, there are a number of magazines and websites that have been using AI written materials. However, they have discovered, CNET discovered that its AI was actually plagiarizing not only its outside stuff, but even its own work. Sports Illustrated and Men's Health, Men's Journal. Men's Journal put up an article about testosterone and men's health, and it was so wrong. Apparently, they didn't do any editing or fact checking on it whatsoever before they put it up, but they've had to do huge corrections, and they probably haven't caught everything. And it fit all of the problems that people are reporting with ChatGPT. It's making things up. It's citing things that don't exist. All of this stuff. And then there are some other ethical issues involved here. So the use that OpenAI is putting to outsourced labor at very discounted pay rates includes these people are basically reviewing materials before they are fed into the AI system. So they are looking for pornography, for openly toxic stuff, and they're paying them pennies to actually look for this horrible stuff so that it doesn't get fed into the AI. So I mean, that's an ethical question. It's certainly an issue with an awful lot of technologies these days, and that's something that we as individuals have to kind of make our peace with where we're going to draw the line on this. And I'll just go in. This is a different kind of AI. Stability AI is an art, AI art or a generation tool. And there are now 2 lawsuits that I know of. The Getty is suing them for copying their photos without permission. And there is also a class action lawsuit in the works for individual smaller artists whose material in a very similar way has been scraped and used without any permission or licensing to create these AI generated artwork. And the way these things work, it's actually very similar. You can go into the art sites, give it a prompt. And one of the things that you can do, especially with Stability's AI, is to tell it to do artwork in the style of so-and-so. And it will produce something, and then you can tweak it. And it's like ChatGPT, it doesn't always do a perfect job, but it's enough that there's a whole big issue now about, where should we draw the line about this sort of thing? How do we draw the line about this? This sort of thing is ethically concerning, shall we say. Now, I did promise that I would go into a little bit about the references issue with ChatGPT. So here's one of the more famous examples. Somebody asked it, what is the most cited economics paper of all time? And it came out with this very likely a theory of economic history by Douglas North and Robert Thomas, published in the Journal of Economic History in 1969. It gives a little summary, how many times it's been cited, that it's considered a classic. I would take this as a reasonable answer to this question. But then this David Smearden goes through and actually pieces out where all of this comes from. I will also produce a list of links for all the pages that I've linked to. And basically he goes through and says, you know, if you take the title, the A theory of economic history is made up of some of the most common words in economic articles. Douglas North and Robert Thomas are either actual people who have published a lot of articles. They also have very common names. The Journal of Economic History, I forgot to check this. I believe it does exist, but there are also a number of journals with very similar titles. And apparently 1969 was a big year for economic theory articles. And so it's basically was picking kind of like the most common likely strings of words. And that is really important in this, in how it comes up with this stuff. As Heidi said, it is not looking for truth, it is looking for likelihood. It's what is likely or common patterns. And that's very important to think about in any of these AI tools. When you're talking about machine learning, and that's what this is it's learning given the body of knowledge that's been fed into it, it's learning patterns. And that's the problem. Truth is not always a common pattern. So it's producing these things that are likely and are, in the pattern that it's doing things. The AI art stuff is notorious for producing things like hands with 6 fingers, not because it's seeing a lot of examples of hands with 6 fingers, but because it's seeing a lot of examples of hands in different positions where you can't actually tell precisely how many fingers they have, and how those kind of line up on the hands. And so it's just reproducing those patterns that end up giving people 6 fingers. So again, it's producing likely patterns, and that's something always to remember whenever you're dealing with one of these. Now, I was actually able to get into ChatGPT this morning. So I wanted to show you some of the examples of the things that I have done with it. ChatGPT does save everything that you do. I did also want to show you the warnings that it gives you. So it's a research preview. Remember, it is not actually a mature product. They're looking for external feedback. They do warn you that it's, it may give offensive or biased results. It is not intended to give advice. I keep seeing people who are saying that you can use ChatGPT to search. And well, no, you can't, because it does not have active access to the internet. What you are searching is the pre-2021 body of information that was fed into ChatGPT. So again, conversations may be reviewed. Don't share any sensitive info. You are able to grade thumbs up, thumbs down, all of your all of the responses, and they have aspects to, they have actually various things that you can give your feedback on. So just some of the things that I have asked it for. Maybe I'm not up. Let's see if it will let me back in. Okay, experiencing high demand. So we may not actually be able to, okay, there we go. So I asked it, what do you know about Southern Connecticut State University? And it gave me this nice little, info. This is a little outdated probably, but I checked, this is not the exact text from, say, Wikipedia, but I suspect that a lot of it does actually come from this. But you notice that I asked it, where does the information come from? And it couldn't tell me. So, this is kind of this is common. It's like publicly available sources. I will point out something interesting about the phrasing here. This information is widely available and commonly known by people who are familiar with the institution. And if you remember that in most citation manuals, it tells you that you do not have to cite commonly known information. So this is something, it's giving a hint that the information that it's providing is commonly known and not, therefore does not necessarily have to be citable, which I don't particularly agree with. I think you should cite if you get information from an AI. I think it's worth citing.
Hello. Look pretty.
Yeah. I asked it, do you like cats? And then when it told me that it was a language model, I asked it if it knows that, is it self-aware? So it admits that it's not sentient. This gets to my argument. I actually don't like the fact that we call these things AIs, because I grew up with reading science fiction where AI actually meant, created intelligence, as in like a conscious being. So these are language models, or in the case of the art models. I did ask it to give me an outline for a presentation on copyright and privacy issues. And it gave me a, pretty standard 5-part system. Apparently it really likes 5-part essays, the whole, old-fashioned 5-paragraph essay. If you ask it to write an essay without giving it any specifics, that's what it will do. And then I asked it to elaborate, and it gave me a bunch of lawsuit case references, none of which I could find. So like in this case, the one I've highlighted, Automated Media, is a company that has been involved in a lot of lawsuits, but I cannot find any lawsuits related to automated creative technologies. The other ones I couldn't find pretty much anything at all. And then I asked it an ethical question, and it said that basically scraping of web web images without permission is not ethical, or at least is against a possibly against copyright. And then I asked it about web text, and I mean, this is exactly what it did. And it's saying that it's not actually You know, in general, it's considered more ethical to use a data set that has been obtained legally. So I found that kind of interesting. Let's see. Oh, that's annoying. It didn't actually save. Oh, there it is. Okay. There it is. Okay. For some reason, it's just listed under new chat. Somebody mentioned that it was actually pretty good at translation. And so, and while they suggested that it was better at European languages, I had a Korean medical article that I had found during a search and decided to see how it would do. I also pasted this into Google Translate and Microsoft's Bing Translate. I would say the Google Translate one was really awful. It started off telling me that digestive tract bleeding was lethal. And I don't know where it got that one. The Microsoft Bing was pretty good. I mean, it made sense, and it was it read awkwardly, but I could definitely get a pretty good idea of what it was doing. This one reads a lot better. I don't read Korean, especially medical Korean, so I am not 100% sure if it actually translated everything accurately, but it reads well. It fits in with the given abstract, which was in English, and all of the English bits that existed in this particular article, which is this journal produces a weird mix of Korean and English text. So all of this actually did fit in with the parts of the text that were in English. So I would say this is actually a pretty good usage. I would definitely be comfortable, maybe not using this directly, but it definitely gives me the best idea of everything I've tried as to what this article is about and whether or not I would want to pursue a human grade translation, or even possibly, you know, like sending these 2 paragraphs to somebody that I know who reads Korean, and just like, could you take a quick look at this and tell me if this is probably what they said, rather than asking them to actually do a translation because they're a friend of mine. So this is actually, you know, this is not bad. So there are things that it's definitely useful for. But again, just remember that it's doing patterns, which is probably why it's pretty good at translation. Translation is patterns. So it's basically, it's taking the Korean text, figuring out what the patterns are in there, doing some kind of Korean to English translation, and then getting the translation, the English translation, and making sure that it matches good English patterns. It's certainly possible that it will misinterpret something along the way and have an error, and it has no way of fixing that. So if you do intend to do anything with the with a system like this with your students, one of the things that I would definitely emphasize with them, and I think talking with your students about these systems is a good idea, because they're going to be running across them. Even if they don't know about them now, they will run across them. Remind them that not all of these systems have any connection to the live internet. ChatGPT does not. They don't check for truth or accuracy. And these are simply going to be, they're going to generate likely looking text. That may help in some cases. I can definitely see, for instance, a student who's having trouble with writing, using this, putting in their text, getting a new version, and then going through it, and like you could actually do this with your student, for instance, looking at it and saying, okay, what were the differences? How did it improve, and I put that in quotations, the text? Is this something that you would choose to do? The real metacognitive work of revising, I can definitely see that it could help with that. Now, as I mentioned, there are many other AI tools out there, and I wanted to show you a few of those, and sort of less AI and more of the large language models and network analysis models that are out there. And how I could definitely see using these in a library perspective. One of the ones that I'm actually kind of excited about is Perplexity. This is perplexity.ai, and it is what they call an answer engine. And so we can put in a question and have it answer the question. It has live search and it cites its sources. Also, you don't have to log in. You can get it to answer things. There are cookies involved and whatnot, but you don't have to give it tons of personal information in order to do that. So, we could use one of these prompts that they have here. Now here it is. It's basically what it's doing is it's sort of summarizing these sources and giving us this little info. There's an expanded view. Pulls in a little bit more info. Again, there are accurate, inaccurate. You can give it a grade, basically. And the part that I'm finding very interesting is that it gives you those sources. We can just click on one of those and see the article itself. The other thing that you can that I have done, and is it a good alternative to Google? This is actually basically what Google is talking about putting into their search. So you should be seeing sometime in the near future, when you type something into Google, it will give you something like this. And then it will have more search underneath. Whether that's a good thing or not, I'm not quite sure. So you can ask a follow-up, and I haven't tried it with this one, so let's see if this works. Use Yep, it worked this time too. I hadn't tried it with this one. This is a live search. Um, you know, and again, I can expand that. So this is the part that actually kind of excites me as a librarian who works with people who are trying to find information. So here we go. Here's a nice little overview with sources. So I now have 5 scholarly sources. And one of the things that we as librarians often suggest is find a couple of articles that answer your question, at least one. And then we can take those articles and construct searches from them. So we can look at things like keyword available. We can read through the abstract and the introduction and get keywords. We can look at the citations and the cited by options. So this is definitely the kind of thing that I would, as a librarian, find as a really useful tool for students, or actually for anybody, to use as a starting point. And what would I do with this? I will give you an example. So here's, so I'm going to take this article title. I'm going to go to another AI-powered tool that you can use for free. This is semanticscholar.org. And I'm going to paste that article title in. Here's my record for this. Go away. My, there we go. One of my Zoom things was sitting right over the control for that. So here's the entry for this. This one works a lot on the citations, the authors, and a semantic analysis of the article itself. In this case, it will also show me the tables. There are 13 citations. And it will also give me an idea of where those citations are used. So there are 9 that are used for background and 1 in methods. That would be 10. So there are 3 that are used somewhere else. It gives me the references, so I can track those back. And then it has related papers. And this is where the semantic analysis comes in. And I found that these are either really good or really bad. So for instance, here, it's come through and given me something that, you know, this is home health, not working from home. But the second one looks pretty good. And see that it's been cited 13 times. So I can go through here. I can see who's citing these. I can see what they've cited. And I can look at these as within the semantic similarity realm. There are a couple of other similar ones. So I can put the same article into connected papers, which is a very similar site. It's working from the same background database, but it builds a graph. So this is the origin paper, and it is highlighted there. It's going through and it is finding related papers based on the citations. And each of these, so you can see that when I hover over here, There's one of them gets a little bit darker. And so I can follow those. Another interesting thing that it will do, so Semantic Scholar looked at what that particular article cited and who is citing it. Connected Papers actually does a 2-level work. So of everything that is in the graph, that's a 1-level connection. It looks at prior works, so what's been cited by all of those. So this is like a 2nd level. And these are likely to be sort of foundational works because they're commonly cited by a whole bunch of related papers. And then there are derivative works that are likely to be reviews of some sort or recent work. So this is a really, really interesting option. And I would definitely encourage you to explore these. This is working strictly on the citation network. So this doesn't actually have the extra kind of semantic analysis AI layer to it. But what it's doing is it's analyzing the connections between papers. And finally, there is Research Rabbit. Now the other things that I've shown so far, these are those you did not have to set up an account. Research Rabbit does require an account. So again, this is not something that I would actually recommend requiring of students, but the other ones can just be used right off the bat. So here are some collections that I have used. And what's interesting about this one is that rather than starting from one paper, you can start from a group of papers. So here I have 13 papers in this group. I can add more very easily. It looks at similar papers, earlier work, later work. It looks at the authors and content that is linked in some way. So if I look at the later work, for instance, and this works much better on a gigantic screen, it again puts up these network graphs. This one is interesting, though. You can also have it put them in a timeline, which again doesn't show up quite as well because my screen isn't big enough. There it is. So what is this brand new paper that has come out? So I can look at that. With all of these, if you do set up an account, you can set up alerts and it can send you information about new things that are that have come out that fit into one of these categories. So this is a really interesting one. And then this is a true AI paper analyzer. So Elicit is talking about becoming a research assistant, an AI-powered research assistant. So you can ask it a question, and it goes through the 175 million papers that it has in its database, and they are adding more on a regular basis. So this is maybe not quite a live search, but it is an updated database that it's working from. You can just ask it a question. And it will give you a summary of the top 4 papers with references. You can ask it for different pieces of this. It will pull out the best thing it can find. So, I mean, sleep training, that's not exactly a useful summary of the intervention, but at least it gives me some idea of what they're doing. But this one is you know, pretty detailed. You can have it look at the outcomes. The number of participants. You know, there we go, number of participants. And you can ask it for other things as well. So this is a really interesting idea. Now this is it's in testing. You do have to set up an account, and sometimes the accounts take a little while to be approved. They are very, very much asking for feedback on this. This uses the same language model as ChatGPT. So it is doing the same kind of thing, but it is doing it in a much more controlled manner. Now I got really excited when I found out that somebody had created a task that is a constant question that I get as a librarian. What do I search with? So I can put in a topic. And what it's doing right now is it's combing through its database and pulling up the keywords, subject headings, common phrases that are associated with articles that would match my question or topics that I've given. Now, another useful thing is on both of these, you can star these and tell it I want more like the starred options, if it can come up with any. In this case, it looks like it hasn't come up with any new ones. Let's try that on here. So I can say that one. That one. And that one, and then I could tell it I want more like those starred options. It's down below. Like I said, this works, there it is. It works better on a bigger screen. Now, if you think about this, though, this is exactly what ChatGPT is doing. So I give it a prompt. It pulls information out of my out of the database that it has related to the prompt, and then I can give it feedback and tell it to pull more information, whether that's more articles like the starred ones or pulling different types of information out of what it's already found. So I think this is where these large language model algorithms that we are now calling AI are going to go in the long run. I think these are what's going to turn out to be useful. And these are going to be very, very useful tools as long as we remember that they are not the end point. We should not be stopping here. You know, I would not want anybody to take these summaries and pop them into a paper and think that their work is done. This is a starting point. And if you talk to your students about this, that's what I would emphasize. All of these things should be starting points. A lot of people are using Wikipedia as a metaphor for the response. When Wikipedia first came out, everybody was like, ban Wikipedia, nobody should ever use this, etc. As we went through, we realized that Wikipedia is actually pretty useful, but it's best for getting an initial overview, for learning some of the language that is used, and for at least with a good Wikipedia entry, it has references. It gives you a place to start. And what we say in the library is Wikipedia is a great place to start and a bad place to finish. You should not stop with Wikipedia. In a similar way, you shouldn't stop with one of these AI tools. And that's that was the problem that these magazines had, is they stopped at the AI generated material. If somebody had taken these, which is basically what they ended up having to do, they took it, they published it, and then they had to go back and they had to edit it because there was so much incorrect information in it. It's really awful that this particular one was a health article, and it was out there for some time before they caught the errors. That should have been caught by an editor before it went live. Somebody should have looked at it before they just published it. So this, as far as I'm concerned, represents what we should be doing with AI gone wrong. We shouldn't publish it first and then edit it. We should use it, review it, revise it, fact check it, and then we can go ahead and do whatever it is that we're going to be doing with this. So there are some tools. You know, as I said, I am particularly really interested in the search term suggestion that Elicit is doing. Elicit, by the way, is elicit.org, and I will make a list of all of these sites that I've mentioned and post that as well. So I'm going to stop my share and open up to additional questions. Or just discussion. What do you think? I see Heidi had put a question in about visual maps for non-research based work like fiction. I have not seen any yet. And I suspect that's because the companies that are doing the mapping work have much stronger ethics than a lot of the companies that are doing just the general stuff. And they have been very reluctant to use anything that is not openly available. The Semantic Scholar, Connected Papers, Research Rabbit, Elicit, they're all working from materials that are completely openly available on the web. So it's either open access full text, or at least the openly available abstracts and keywords and things like that. The references are very commonly openly available these days. That's definitely not true for fiction. You know, most fiction writers, quite understandably, are not interested in putting their materials up for free on the web. Though it would be interesting to see if anybody would do it with like fan fiction that is available on the web. That would be a really interesting corpus to feed into an AI. I do know that there is I believe it's a romance novel generator. Where like they basically specialize in formula fiction. And it can actually generate a pretty decent mid-quality romance novel. Certainly something that could be easily edited to be a decent publication, from what I've heard.
Oh, from what I've heard, ChatGPT has that beat hands down, right?
Yeah.
Because it will, of course, generate romance novel. I'm really excited about receiving an index or a link to
Yes.
the sources you just mentioned. Preeti has a really interesting question in the chat. She says, Rebecca, all those sites you just talked about, you had an index. Did you access them through OpenAI?
So these are all separate from OpenAI, though you know, the materials that Semantic Scholar, et cetera, are using, because they were openly available on the web, I would assume that for the pre-2021 materials, that OpenAI also ingested all of that material as well.
I actually understood the question to be, did you try asking ChatGPT or OpenAI for a list? I don't know if that was Preeti's question, but I was like, oh.
Hi, Rebecca. What I meant to ask is, you had them neatly organized in a list. Is that your browser window, or
Yes.
is it through? Oh, okay.
Yes, that was my browser window, and I have it set to have tabs on the side.
Okay.
And I like that. It makes for a nice presentation view.
And it's easily accessible, and so yeah, that's why I was like, okay. Otherwise, it's opening different windows in different places. This was easy to do.
Yeah.
Of course, you're way more tech savvy, so I was like, okay, that's a cool way to access these. So.
Yeah, this is actually, I'm testing out a browser called ARC, A-R-C, and it's based on Chrome. But it has a lot of nice features, and one of them is that is that nice view.
Well, thank you, and thank you again for the wonderful presentation to both of you.
Mhm.
Yeah, hi.
Hello. Thank you for this excellent introductory presentation on AI. I mean, I was filled with alarm and trepidation when I was first starting to learn what this was all about. And now I realize what a powerful tool this is, a useful tool for our, not only our own research, but I'm just thinking of global knowledge in and of itself to be able to do this. And I'm also, I can also imagine how this extraordinary technology is currently being used by, dangerous characters in politics, government, investigative police forces, and all this. Oh my God, we really have to be alert. We really have to be on guard. So thank you so much for sharing also the privacy dimensions of these tools. This is critical. We have to always keep that in mind when we use it for ourselves or students or for whatever purposes. Thank you very, very much.
Yes, there are a lot of ethical issues involved in this. And it is definitely being used in negative ways. One technology that I didn't talk about because it's now been taken down. There's a voice generation AI program that was up for a little while. I believe they've shut it down again, but it could take a 3-second recording of somebody's voice and generate them talking about anything you wanted.
Nine sentences. You actually, there's an app that you can use, or there is an app, I'm sure there's multiple platforms, but there's an app you can use to record 9 sentences so that if you want, for example, Siri or Alexa or whatever to use your voice, it will use your voice.
Wow.
Problem is that data can then be used
Wow.
to, you know, if it's hacked.
Yeah,
So
so the one I'm thinking about was actually an open one that you could upload any recording, including a recording of somebody else, and then type in the text that you wanted it to read.
Wow.
And so it was almost instantly used to have celebrities saying really awful things.
Oh my God. You know, I can imagine the abuse of these tools also by the health insurance industries, you know, in terms of, you know, trying to dig into health patterns of their clients and so forth. Really, we have to be so alert to the negative uses and abuses of this technology. The voice copying is something terrifying. And we've already seen examples of that in the news. I mean, we've seen that, for instance, Russia has been accused of using these tools now to generate more of its you know, political support for its invasion of Ukraine. So it's already being used. And, you know, I just want to really thank you for giving us this heads up, this opening to this. Really, it's a whole new revolution, you know, the industrial revolution, the computer revolution. I really think this is taking us to a new eon of knowledge and research.
On the other hand, you know, I mean, there's a lot of danger and there's a lot of potential for it. One of the first things that I tried with ChatGPT was I took a couple of paragraphs from a really fascinating but terribly written article. It was, I'm pretty sure, written by somebody whose first language was not English. And obviously the journal had not done much in the way of copy editing with them. And I just fed those paragraphs into ChatGPT and asked it to rewrite it in better, what is it? I think I said something better, but still formal English. And it was great. It was much more readable. It did not change the meaning, you know, and if I was writing in a language that I don't speak, I would be very tempted to run my stuff through this to clean it up and then send it to somebody to eliminate that kind of first round of copy editing.
We have international students. I did the same thing, Rebecca. I took a 70-page thesis that had taken me hours and hours and hours to help the non-native English speaker edit, and just copied the entire thing and pasted the entire thing into ChatGPT. And sure enough, it did a better job than I did editing it. And it took 3 to 5 minutes, as opposed to, probably 50 hours. of my time.
Now, remember, you've just added that student's work to ChatGPT's database.
Oh, I got her permission before I did it. Yep,
Yeah.
no, she and I talked about it. You know, because it's really, really important to have these tools. You know, so on the one hand, clearly these tools are going to make it much, much easier for non-native speakers of any language,
Mhm.
right, to produce quality communication and text. On the other hand, you know, one of the things I didn't mention is that ChatGPT's model they just announced this month is going to be a $20 a month subscription
Mhm.
or $47 per month for access to the premium features.
Yeah.
In other words, they're anticipating that this is going to be effectively as valuable as, you know, our phones that we all carry around. Okay. And on the one hand, you know, I'm worried, like, how are our students going to access that, right?
It's going to be in
For
Microsoft.
how are our students are relatively privileged in the global context, right? You know, does this just deepen the divide between the information haves and have-nots, or in this case, the AI haves and have-nots, right? Or, you know, do we as an institution respond and say, when it does go on a subscription base, that we want the university to provide this to our students through student fees?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And Microsoft is going to include it in their in Word. I've heard definitely Word and Outlook.
Oh, wow.
They are planning to integrate and it's going to be ChatGPT, the open AI product, because they're the ones that are working with it. But Google has its own system. And there are several other ones out there. So it would not surprise me if there will continually be options. They may not be quite as good, but I suspect that these are simply going to be pretty universally available, you know, in the future. But yes, the better quality things are going to be paid services. And again, we're going to have that digital divide
Yes.
that we were so hoping we were going to get rid of soon.
Yes. But as you point out, Rebecca, this is a good starting research tool, doesn't present a finished product. So I mean, we have to make sure make sure that students understand that. And I have such confidence in the library profession. For sure, the next generation of librarians are going to be so adept at managing these tools, and you know, we will be able to benefit from their knowledge.
And at the same time, it's a great misinformation tool. People are going to be putting up these articles, and it's going to be an interesting cycle. Because as people use these tools to create disinformation or misinformation, whether, you know, is it on purpose or not, they're going to be posting these things. They're going to be writing articles. They're going to be making blog posts. They're going to be putting them in Twitter. That is going to be digested by the next round of these language models, because it's available on the internet. And we're going to have misinformation being fed into these systems because it was generated by the last round.
Wow.
So one of the things that I would definitely recommend is working with your students on evaluating the accuracy and quality of information that they're reading. And I include the library's materials in that. Our database, just because it's in the library, does not necessarily mean that it is 100% accurate or that it is the best information for the use in all circumstances. You know, they should be learning to evaluate their information and doing it on everything.
Right. Right. And Heidi, really, congratulations. I love the way you integrated into your classwork on computer ethics. That's phenomenal. Really, I mean, this is something that I can see will soon become one of the general education requirements here at universities across the nation, just how important it is to learn what this tool is, the ramifications, the limitations, and most of all, the ethical consequences. So I really, you really are taking the lead in that. So congratulations. I love it. I really do.
Full disclosure, I actually had a winter course with only 8 students, but a full quarter of them, 2 of them, were very clearly using ChatGPT because the course started December 19th when it really wasn't broadly available. And then all of a sudden, ta-da, like the first week of January, their writing was like, graduate level versus, typical undergraduate level. And so I was like, well, what do I do? And I decided to take their papers and grade them using ChatGPT. And then I sent them an email indicating that I had graded it using ChatGPT and offering to meet. And of course, they both immediately took me up on it. And I said, look, first, kudos to you. You're avant-garde, you're pioneers of using this, but you've got to credit it the way I did, right? I said I graded it with ChatGPT. You got to tell me you wrote it with ChatGPT. And can we talk about the purpose of higher ed? If you're going to write with ChatGPT and I'm going to grade with ChatGPT, right? It's just such a beautiful example of the absurd, right? We laughed about it like I am now, right? And then I introduced them both to GPT-0, which had just been released in that first week of January, and to the concept the following week of watermarks. So GPT-0, there's a Princeton senior, right? A journalism and computer science student who created this over his winter break, right? On New Year's Eve, he finished it at a cafe. And it provides a perplexity score and a score of the burstiness, and it's pretty good. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good at determining the likelihood that something has been written by AI. So there's a lot of conversations now about creating watermarks. Now, you might think when I first encountered that, I was like, watermark, a student's just going to take the text and retype it, right? No, a watermark is in the text itself. So the concept is that the companies who are producing this AI would embed a secret code of kind of, letters where the AI is creating a string, a non-English string of letters that could be decoded to determine that something has been created by AI unless it's significantly edited, right?
I will also point out that OpenAI has actually come out with its own tool, which I thought was hilarious. I mean, it's like, talk about creating your own market.
Yeah. Right,
and it's actually worse than GPT-0.
It's way worse than GPT-0. Yeah. But of course, OpenAI has also, with ChatGPT 3.5, which is the most recent version, they've now embedded a loop that takes GPT-0, the Princeton students' detection system, and pumps the text through a GPT-0-like calculator and increases the perplexity and the burstiness. So if take ChatGPT-0 text now, like this week, and feed it into GPT-0, it'll get a pretty high perplexity and burstiness score, right? Which is not to say that you can't ask students to edit it. My initial thought in January was, I'm going to take the GPT output and ask students to edit this and continually pump it through GPT-0 until they get a perplexity score of, like, at first I said 25 or more, and then I said, okay, 50 or more, so that they're understanding what the difference between AI and human-like text is. They did play with ChatGPT-0 in the first group work, but it's evolving so rapidly. And every time there's a new AI detection, OpenAI is just going to embed that into, it's going to use it to make ChatGPT's output more, well, I don't know if I want to say human-like, it'll just make an end run around the detection system. And yes, as Rebecca said, OpenAI itself is going to effectively retain the right to be the sole determinant of whether or not it is OpenAI produced, because they'll embed the watermark and they'll give you the tools to determine that. You know, again,
Yeah, the OpenAI detection tool actually has, or the last set of benchmarks that I saw has a false positive rate of 9%,
Wow.
which is pretty high.
Yeah.
So you could be feeding your students' work into that, and 9% of them would get graded as this is AI generated when it actually wasn't.
and the
Wow.
danger, of course, is this all of the students who are better writers.
Yeah.
In the traditional sense.
Yeah.
Right. And so what's going to happen is there will be implicit, if not explicit, bias rearing its head, because you're going to have to decide individually whether that, cis white male student who produced the text is more likely to produce it on his own or using AI versus, Black female, choose your, whatever it is you want. And the reality is that we are biased. And if we're not openly accepting and acknowledging that and checking it, those biases are going to become embedded in, in a way that will determine whether or not we're accusing students of plagiarism or not, which can be life-changing for those students.
Yeah, I think it's especially going to hit students who are not as good writers, but are trying to write academic, and probably are neurodiverse students as well. The ones who have linguistic issues that make it more difficult for them to produce, natural flow of language. They are going to get flagged by these tools. In the same way, that Turnitin or Blackboard Safe Assign flags things that are not actually plagiarized. I find it absolutely hilarious that Safe Assign and Turnitin both will flag correctly formatted citations as plagiarism, because they are a correctly formatted citation is identical to any other correctly formatted citation for the same material. So in a way, when these things are flagging your reference list, the higher the flag, the better your citations.
Better the citation.
Now it'll be interesting to see. I know Turnitin is looking at these language models as well. They are planning to integrate some kind of AI detection tool in there. They haven't said how. Obviously, it's going to be proprietary, I'm sure. But they will be doing this, and so that's going to be yet another thing. As we as faculty use these tools, that we have to keep an eye out that we are not misusing these detection tools.
I'm so curious about what some of the others in this, I know we've only got a few minutes, but Dave's been typing in the chat, and Mike, you're a former chair of English. Bob, you're, you're one of the quickest to adopt and also question technology that I know of at Southern. You and I go back 10 years at least. I'm just curious what others have to say.
Yeah, Mike, I think we're all trying to learn because this is a scramble to digest this stuff.
Heidi? Yeah, I'm still waiting for your explanation for Gödel, Escher, and Bach. So
Bob and I spent very long hours when I first. He's the only one that had the patience to listen to my kind of conversations about my dissertation. And we can talk on Zoom now, Bob.
Wow.
Since I know people are signing off, thank you all very much for coming and for sticking around. But I think at least a few of us can stick around for a little longer.